Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the always humbly and originally named Pat Flynn Show. I'm really excited for this episode. I think this is going to be a very special episode for many reasons that we're going to get into. I am joined by Dr. J.P. Moreland, who is a professional philosopher. He's got more degrees than I think actually the same number of degrees as I have fingers on my hand. Is that correct, JP?
Well, you must have some fingers cut off, I think.
What is it, 4 then? Is it?
Yeah, it's 4. Yeah, that's right.
And as I was talking to you before we started recording, I've been a fan of your work for a long time for many reasons. Specifically, your work in philosophy of mind has always been of great interest to me. And then you came out with this really wonderful book on, of all things, anxiety, which I also told you that it's something that I have both a personal and long family history with. So I'm like, well, my goodness, I absolutely have to have Dr. Moreland on, and I just want to thank you for taking the time to join me. I'm really glad to have you here.
Well, I tell you, it's a delight to be here with you, Pat, and I'm looking forward to our chat.
So why don't we just start with some of the formalities, if you will, for people who might not be familiar with your work and what you've done. What's the sort of brief biography that we can offer people?
Well, I came to Christ at the University of Missouri as a chemistry major my junior year in 1968, and joined Campus Crusade staff for 10 years, and went to Dallas Seminary, and then took an MA and a PhD in philosophy under Dallas Willard at USC. Ultimately, because I felt like there was a great need for Christians to be able to speak into the secular culture intelligently and winsomely. And so I've taught philosophy coming up on my 30th year. I've been a Jesus follower for 51 years, and I have had a life of anxiety and some depression that I inherited a disposition to from my mom's side of the family. And the book Finding Quiet is about what I found that really, really helped me get out of it. And so I teach philosophy now, and my main calling is to encourage, embolden, and equip people to know why they believe what they believe, and to encourage them that being a Jesus follower or a disciple is the smartest thing you could do with your life.
So I was on a podcast yesterday with a friend of mine, and I told him that you were coming on, and he was so excited because he said that he heard a talk of yours. This was years ago. And before he heard you talk, he said he never heard anybody talk intelligently about religion before. And you so inspired him that he now is finishing his master's in philosophy. And
no way!
Hoping to carry that on. So I just wanted to pass that along to you. I thought that was a really
man, that's cool. Thank you so much.
But so I want to focus a good amount on your new book and anxiety and mental health. But I mean, I can't have you on and not talk philosophy of mind. I mean, that would be that would be egregious. I can't not do that.
Yes.
But there's also, I think, a really important connection between philosophy of mind and having the right conception of the human person, and then how we go about treating mental health and anxiety and all that. And you make that really clear in your book. And I think that's really important because I know even in my life, as I was kind of making my philosophical journey, there were certain mistakes that I made in trying to heal my anxiety and various bouts of depression, because I think I held to a certain conception of what a human is, what a self is, that it just wasn't correct.
Yes.
And it kind of blocked out, I would say, certain treatment paths because I thought that they didn't align philosophically with what
That's right.
So I'm sure you can probably articulate what I'm trying to say a little bit better.
Oh, Pat, absolutely, because you're not at all unusual in this regard. I think the Christian community in general has just not had a clear understanding of the human person. And the reason this isn't just a theoretical issue, as you pointed out, is that without a clear model of what we are, then our practical application is going to be confused. and it could be off and in a direction that keeps us from accessing help that would follow from a clear model of the human person. And so, in my view, in Chapter 2 of Finding Quiet, I try to lay this out, but that we are souls, and our souls have different faculties in them, or sets of abilities. The mind, the heart, the mind, the will, the emotions, the spirit are all faculties of the soul. Like the soul is a chest of drawers, and each faculty is a specific drawer. There's a sock drawer, and there's a t-shirt drawer, and so on. And the mind is the drawer that contains thoughts and beliefs, and the faculty of emotion is the drawer that contains your sensations and your feelings, and so on. But while we are embodied, the soul is extremely dependent on and interacts with our body. The soul has developed eyes to allow us to see. And so if our eyes are poked out, we're not going to be able to see, even though the faculty of sight in the soul is still operative. By the same token, the mind uses the brain to think, and by the way, the heart muscle, interestingly, and we use the brain and the heart muscle for emotions. And so, what we've learned, and I'll close with this, is that if your brain chemistry, or if there is something that has been developed in your nervous system or your heart muscle that is a habitual trigger for negative thoughts and negative emotions, then you're going to be depressed and you're going to be anxious. And similarly, not only can your brain affect your feelings and mind, but your mind can affect your brain, because if you think good, solid thoughts, whatever's true, lovely, and so on, as Paul says, if you think on those kinds of things and just think half full for a couple of 3 weeks, they can do a brain scan, and you have actually restructured the neurons in your brain and your brain chemistry. And they've shown this on brain scans. It's called neuroplasticity. The brain has the ability to change its structure if we, by thinking, by just thinking different thoughts. And so it's an amazing thing. What this opens up is the possibility that medications, anxiety and depression medications from a doctor or a psychiatrist could be extremely helpful. They are extremely helpful. They do have side effects, and for some people they don't work, and so you should always check with the doctor and be under their care. But because our brain and our emotions affect one another, if your brain is broken, then you need to fix it so that you can get to work on your spiritual life and your emotions more effectively. And that's where the medications would be in a practical application of this model of the human person.
Yeah, and I think we're trying to avoid sort of two ends of the extreme here. One is a sort of a reductionist physicalism or a materialist.
Absolutely.
Which would try to deny that there's any such thing as the soul altogether. But on the other hand, it may be something more like a Gnosticism or an idealism, which says that holds a very low view of the body and only emphasizes the mind and thoughts. And I think what's really powerful and correct about your book is you're saying, no, we are composite entities. We are embodied, but we are still a soul. So if there's a physical problem, it makes sense to seek a physical solution. But at the same time, if there's a spiritual problem, we need a spiritual solution. If there's a mental problem, we need them. And it was just so refreshing to see that comprehensive take. But let's spend another minute, because maybe somebody here is skeptical and they're listening, and they think, well, you know what? Maybe I do think we're just sort of electric meat. Maybe I don't really believe in a soul. I think you're probably the guy to ask. I know you've got all kinds of arguments, but what do you think is the best case for somebody who might be coming from a reductionist standpoint? What is the best case or series of arguments to help somebody understand that we really are more than just the chemical interactions, right?
Yes. I'd make two quick points. The first is when I lectured at the National Institute of Health to about 130 neurosciences and research biologists. I was invited, and the first point I argued was that when it comes to the nature of consciousness, what is consciousness, and what is the thing that has consciousness? Is it the brain, the body, or a soul? I said that the discoveries of neuroscience have absolutely nothing to do with the question. The only thing neuroscience can do is help us understand dependency relationships between the soul and the brain, but they can't say anything about whether or not there is a soul. And I got no pushback on that. And so I want to say that people who think neuroscience has shown that there isn't a soul, they just misunderstand the limitations of neuroscience, which is just to establish correlations between consciousness and brain states and how they relate to one another. That's all neuroscience can do. Mm-hmm. So the issue is a philosophical one. Is there a soul or not? And the case is kind of overwhelming, in my opinion. For example, I think we all know that we have free will, occasionally at least. I mean, sometimes I do things and I'm responsible for what I did. And the only way I'm responsible is because I had a choice to not do what I did do. I was free, and it was up to me. But if I'm just my brain and my nervous system, then I am completely determined by my biochemistry. And there is no such thing as freedom. Only if I am something other than electrolyzed meat could I possibly have free will. Another argument that I think is very, very good is that there is something true about me that is not true about my brain or body, and that is that I'm the kind of thing that could be disembodied after death. Now, I'm not saying I am disembodied after death, although I do think that the case for life after death is overwhelmingly strong. But when people look at Dateline or 2020, and there's going to be a show on near-death experiences, for example, 99% of the people will say, look, I'm skeptical of these things, but I'll grant you they might be true. And I'll allow the evidence to settle the issue. Well, nobody's going to do that if there's a show on Dateline that they've discovered square circles in Montana. Mm-hmm. I don't think I'm skeptical, but I'm willing to see the evidence for square circles in Montana. People know ahead of time that that's impossible because it's contradictory. Mm-hmm. Now, the claim that I might exist disembodied, that there's something true of me, namely that I have the property of being possibly disembodied, makes me different from my brain and body, because not only will my brain and body never exist in a disembodied state, but they couldn't possibly exist in a disembodied state. I have no idea what it means to say there is a disembodied brain or a disembodied body. It seems to me that the brain and body are essentially physical. Mm-hmm. So they can't exist disembodied, but I can. I at least could. That means that I have a potential. Maybe I exist disembodied, that my brain and body doesn't. And so this doesn't prove life after death, but what it shows is I can't be my brain and body because there's something true of me that's not true of them.
And that's Leibniz's law, isn't it? Right? If A equals B, then whatever is true of A must also be true of B.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Including anything that we could predicate of A. So if there's
right.
Mm-hmm. So if there's a situation that we can even conceive where something could be true of me, such as being disembodied, that isn't true of B or my body, then A does not in fact equal B. I find that argument.
That's right. Mm-hmm. It's a powerful argument, and it really has never been dealt with adequately.
Yeah. So, by the way, speaking of near-death experiences, haven't you done a fair amount of looking into that yourself?
I have.
Mm-hmm. And
I've done a ton of research on it.
any particular insights that you think would be
Oh
useful
yeah,
sharing?
there's no question they're real. It's beyond reasonable doubt. The evidence is kind of overwhelming. The best book to read for just a good overall case for the evidence for life after death is Jeffrey Long's book, The Evidence of the Afterlife. But a lot of people think, well, gosh, these things contradict the Bible. And the truth of the matter is that over 95% of near-death experiences worldwide, which numbers in the close to 300 million, and there are at least 14 million people in America that have had them. John Burke's book, Imagine Heaven, best book on the subject I've read, I think shows beyond reasonable doubt that what people think make these contradictory to Scripture, in fact, aren't contradictory to Scripture, and that these near-death experiences are very, very compatible with biblical teaching about the afterlife. The main piece of evidence that these are real is that people, when they die and leave their bodies, discover information about things in the room next to where they died, or in the floor above them, or procedures that were going on they couldn't know, all kinds of things. They discover facts that are later verified by the nurses and doctors or eyewitnesses, and that are sometimes actually in the medical charts, that they could not have known if they had just had a oxygen deprivation to the brain or something like that. There is absolutely no naturalistic explanation for how these people who were brain dead, they should have had no consciousness at all, gain knowledge of things that were in other locations or in places that they could not have known.
Yeah, it's incredible. I haven't done a heavy amount of research into it, but I've done some, and I've looked at both your work. That's how I knew about it, and another friend of mine who's done a good amount of looking into this. And the one that really gets me are the cases of people who are congenitally blind.
Absolutely, they're born blind. Yeah.
Oh man, and how you could even conceive of giving a naturalistic explanation for that is, I just don't think that you can. So anyway, thanks for entertaining these arguments, Dr.
You're welcome,
Moreland.
Pat. You're welcome.
I think it's so important, and I think that's such a great contribution of your book, is we need the right conception of the human person, so that way we can start to seek effective treatment habits for mental health. Because if we're pushing away the physical, we're obviously physical. That could be a problem. If we're pushing away the mental or the spiritual, because we obviously have mental and spiritual components, that can be a problem as well. So for those of you who are wondering, well, why the heck did we just, kind of dive into some, maybe somewhat technical philosophy there? I think that this is important for the conversation, and I think you would probably agree with that, right?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And I want to assure the readers that in Finding Quiet, I tell my own story about what happened to me. But then when I go into, what is a human person, and how does this, what does this imply about attacking anxiety and depression? I want people to understand that I try to make this clear and simple and not technical, and that there's a real practical application to it, so that people don't need to be afraid they won't be able to understand it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really great, and I think it's something that is unfortunately missing from a lot of anxiety workbooks and help programs out there. Which again was part of the reason I was so excited to see that you put something out on this.
Well, thank you, Pat.
If you wouldn't mind, Dr. Moreland, I think it might be helpful to people maybe to hear a bit of your personal story. So we kind of got the academic side. We know you're a professional philosopher, but you obviously have dealt with this and struggled with this. So
yeah, sure, I'd love to.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I was born with a genetic predisposition to general anxiety disorder. And I know that because the whole side of my mom's family were on medications. My grandfather was a nervous wreck. My daughter, that looks like me, has anxiety. My daughter, that looks like my wife, doesn't. So there was a genetic predisposition That doesn't determine me to be anxious, but it does make it an inclination, and it makes it harder for me to not be anxious than the average person.
Mm-hmm.
Combine that with the fact that I observed my mother being a nervous, anxious wreck until I left home, went to college, and my father died when I was a very, very young boy. I had trauma, and I learned how to be anxious by my family of origin. One of the things I point out in the book is that a lot of anxiety, not all of it, but a good bit of it is a learned habit. And the good news is that you can unlearn that habit and replace it with other things by certain techniques that are biblically and scientifically based. And I show those in the book. But continuing, I had anxiety. I was kind of high strung and had anxiety for the rest of my life, but it wasn't overwhelming until the end of the school year of 2003. I'd had a year from hell. This is the most stressful year I'd ever had, and I had a 9-month sabbatical facing me. And at the end of the school year, in the middle of the night, I had a panic attack, which I didn't know what was going on. And to make a long story short, that led to a 7-month nervous breakdown where I was completely dysfunctional. I was curled up in a fetal position on the couch for a month. I had electricity going through my brain, down my back of my neck and into my chest. I was scared to death of irrational things like the phone ringing. Eventually, I got well, and for the next 10 years, I was basically okay. Mm-hmm. But then it happened again in May of 2013, 10 years later, mm-hmm. and I had a 5-month nervous breakdown where I started teaching in the fall, but I had to quit after 2 weeks and have other people teach my classes, and I was let go for that semester. At that time, I believe the Lord spoke to me, and he said, I want you to use your research abilities to discover what you are to do to get rid of your anxiety with my Spirit's help. And I want you to let people know about it. And so I tell you, Pat, I must have read 40 books, secular psychology, Christian spiritual formation, discipleship books. And what I did is I took what I learned and I boiled it down into 4 major practices and a set of other ideas and information. And I began to practice these 4 practices and do a few of the other things. And after 2 years, well, first of all, after practicing these things for about 2.5 months, I began to change in a way that my family noticed. Mm-hmm. Evidence for this is that after I had been practicing these things from about 2014 to the August of 2015, these things were such habits that I was just kind of filled with joy and peace. Little did I know that in August of 2015, I was going to begin a 2-year period where I would have 8 surgeries. I had 3 different kinds of life-threatening cancers. Wow. And I had a pacemaker put in, and I had chemo and radiation. I had to wear a chemo pump at home. And my wife is walking right now, but when she gets back, she'll tell you that during that time, I was just full of peace and joy, and I just wasn't bothered by it. Whereas, 5 years earlier, this would have made me a nervous wreck. And doggone it, the things that I have put in the book actually worked.
Well, I couldn't imagine a greater test, honestly. I got anxious just reading about all the things you had to go through.
It was unbelievable. And, I wasn't afraid of dying where I used to be. And it was just kind of incredible. And my kids looked at me and they said, Dad, who the heck are you? Mm-hmm. And I said, I don't know. I've been doing these spiritual practices every day. And I've been on medication, but I was before. But I think all this stuff has just really worked for me, and that's the key thing one of the things I say in the book is do not waste your suffering.
Hmm.
Every occasion in life is an occasion to be formed or deformed. And I don't want to be deformed by these breakdowns. I want to somehow let them form me.
Hmm.
And so I wrote this book because I believe the Lord wanted me to, and he didn't want me to waste my suffering. And so that's the story.
Well, I have to say, your book has got me really excited for a number of reasons. And just to kind of give the quick background, your story is
Yeah,
interesting because it seems like you kind of maybe suffered from a general anxiety for a long period of life, and then you had
I
that
did.
first panic attack.
Yes.
I had my first full blown panic attack around like the fifth or sixth grade, so it hit me very
Oh,
early.
no.
Yeah, very early on, and then I became pretty much
Oh, boy.
agoraphobic for about a year. Um,
Oh, sure.
yeah, and then through I actually was on medication for a while, and it was great. It helped me a lot, and then I
Good.
eventually through various practices came off it, and
Uh-huh.
and I guess the thing that excites me about your book is, as many people will know who've gone on and off various forms of medication before, is when you do it, certain symptoms come back. But I learned
Hmm. Hmm.
various coping strategies and whatever that I
Yeah.
still have that sort of general anxiety that sort of runs through, but I'm successful in spite of it. But what gets
Yes.
me excited about your book is it has, and I told you this before, is it has all this new stuff in it that
Yeah.
and frankly, I was surprised by this because anybody who's anxious, they tend to direct that obsessive energy
Yes.
towards looking into
Right.
why they're anxious, right? Like, of course we're going to read 40
Right.
books on the
Right.
subject.
Exactly.
What else are we going to do? So the fact that there's so much stuff in here that I've never even tried or practiced surprised me, but makes me really excited. I just finished it, and so I'm about to start putting some of these techniques into play. But if you wouldn't mind, maybe we could give a general overview of what some of these techniques are. I mean, I don't
Yes.
even know where to start because there's so many. There's such a wonderful toolkit in here. But I just wanted to
Right.
offer that to you because I have to say I've read a
Yeah.
lot of stuff on this, and there's a lot of stuff here that I've never seen before.
Well, right. Before I do that, just a quick word about medications. Obviously, you want to see a doctor, a specialist in brain chemistry, a psychiatrist, which I did. But there are two things I want the listeners to make sure they understand. I would never recommend medication on its own. I would always say if you need medication, go to a doctor and see and take it. But also engage in spiritual practices and Christian counseling and good psychology. Attack this thing from every aspect of your being:
Mm-hmm.
mind, emotion, soul, brain, body, all of it. The second thing I want to say about medications is if people are listening and they're against it and they don't think that Christians should take this, or they're skeptical, all I am asking you, if you're there, all I'm asking is that you give me a chance. Just please give me a chance. Get the book and just give me a chance to persuade you otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm asking you to listen with an open mind to the case I make. And if you end up not agreeing, well, okay, we don't agree on it. That's fine. But at least give me a chance. That's all I'm asking. Now, let's go to your question. The main thing I want to communicate to our listeners is that it is important to form new habits of thinking and of feeling that develop new grooves in your brain and your nervous system and your heart muscle to replace the old grooves. Now, you might think of these grooves as just triggers that will trigger negative self-talk, trigger fear, anxiety, and so on. And these, if you suppose you engage in the self-talk, what's going to happen to me? Oh my gosh, what if this happens? This is going to be absolutely terrible. Or if I go into a crowd, I'm going to get absolutely overwhelmed. I can't get out. I get claustrophobia. Okay, those kind of thoughts now are habits. They're not. They don't have anything to do with reality necessarily. They're just habits, and they're grooved in the brain. And so, what you have to do to get rid of them is you have to replace those habits with new habits. And so, the book is about habit formation and techniques under the guidance of the Spirit to help you replace your anxiety-inducing or depressive-inducing triggers with peace and joy triggers. And the first exercise is what I call the four-step solution. And just briefly, it is a way of learning how to spot almost subconscious negative self-talk that is triggered by the brain habitually, that ends up causing anxiety and depression. And then I follow a series of steps that are psychologically sound and I think biblically based to allow you to get rid of this thought and to replace it with thoughts that are half full. So the goal is to not be half empty anymore, but to be half full, or not to have triggers that produce anxiety and depression, but to replace them with triggers that produce peace and joy. So the first practice involves what to do with those trigger thoughts. The second practice involves how to use your heart muscle, which the Bible says a lot about the heart, and I can't go into this. This is not New Age. I can't stand the New Age. This is a medically discovered fact about the heart that is actually consistent with the scriptures and medieval theology. And so I talk about how to use what's going on in your chest area, what emotions and so on are going on there, to take anxious thoughts or depressive thoughts and feelings and to replace them in your heart, in your chest area, with feelings of great warmth and appreciation and peace and love and joy. So that's the second technique. The third technique involves a certain kind of prayer that has as goal learning to attach to God and connect to Him and to sense His presence and to exchange warmth and love with each other. It's not for petitionary prayer or anything else, which is important for other times of praying. But I walk through a series of steps that I take every day. I did it this morning. And I used to do it 2 hours a day, but now I probably do it 45 minutes a day, where I pray for, say, 30 to 40 minutes in the morning and maybe 15 minutes before I go to bed. Mm-hmm. And it's a different form of praying than a lot of people have heard, but it's thoroughly biblical, and it helps you connect with God and to sense His presence and to feel His love and warmth and to exchange that with Him. The final practice is just the practice of learning the art of expressing gratitude to God all day long. And there are certain things you're supposed to do and certain things you don't want to do when you're expressing gratitude, and I talk about that. So those are the four practices, and I talk about how to develop them as new habits. And after about 2 months or so, if you do it every day, guess what? They become second nature. But when you're first practicing them, like golf or learning Spanish or whatever you're learning, the piano, you're going to be lousy at it. It's not going to help anything, and you're going to be frustrated. But you have to stick with it, because after anywhere from 22 days up to, say, 3 months, if you stick with it, you'll get good at it, and after a while, it becomes second nature.
Yeah, and I think that's such an important point, that people have the right expectations, like we would if we were starting an exercise program or learning a piano. Yeah. I get it. When you're anxious, you want things to feel better right away. Believe me.
Right.
I'm sure Dr. Moreland gets that as well. You just want that
I get it.
quickly as possible. But I fell into this trap so many times where if I didn't find that instant relief, I would quit. And so, you just wind up wasting so much time and suffering for so much longer, where if you're just willing to be consistent and have that patience. And let's be honest. I mean, 2 months isn't that long in the grand scheme of things. You're going to get 2 months older anyways, hopefully, right? So why not?
Yeah, I'm with you. I totally agree.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, why not, just be consistent for these 2 months, and things might, radically start to change for the better because of that. So I think that's a really important point that like learning golf or anything else, these are habits that are going to take some time to ingrain and establish. But we can be hopeful that they will pan out. They will change us. Again, we're not.
They really will.
It's not a 5-10 year thing here. I mean, by the end of summer, for example, you could be feeling really good.
Yeah.
It's implemented.
Yeah, and I can tell you honestly that that's what happened to me. And now these practices are just sort of part of what I do. And I used to. My big problem was I always would catastrophize or worry about the future. And I did a lot of what ifing. And then I would think, oh my gosh, if that happened, and I would make it worse than it would be. Mm-hmm. And then I'd spend all my time trying to figure out how I could keep it from happening. Mm-hmm. Well, you know what? I'll be honest. I probably spent 50-something years of my life living in the future. And for the last 3 years, I don't live in the future any longer. My wife will ask me, in fact, she asked me today, what have I got going next week? And I told her I have absolutely no idea. I know what I've got going now and today. So I still plan. I still look on Sunday at my calendar for the next few weeks to make sure that Monday I'm going to be doing what I need to do to be ready for, let's say, Friday. But then I forget about it, and I've learned to live in the day. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you, Pat, I've also learned not to fight your anxious thoughts and try to reason with them and get rid of them. When you first have an anxious thought that you ever had, that may be a good thing to do. It's called cognitive behavioral therapy, and I think the scriptures would indicate that you are to learn how to reason about these and dismiss them. But after a while, if you've had the thought several times, mm-hmm. if you keep trying to out-reason the thought or to figure out why you're having it and to spend your time thinking about it in the hopes that that's going to get rid of it, it actually does the opposite. It digs those grooves in your brain even deeper, and it makes the triggering of that thought much more natural and part of your character. Yep. And so it's harder to get rid of. So what you have to do is to learn not to get down in the mud with those suckers and find a way to stop thinking about them.
And that must be I
have a solution.
That must be especially, I just want to make the note, that's got to be especially difficult for a philosopher, where your job is to reason, right?
Dude, you're right. Maybe that's why I went into philosophy, because I'm so sick, and broken.
But for the same reason that people might go into psychology or what have you, not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's to become aware, because I'm the same way. I want to try and reason everything out, and you have these anxious thoughts, and I'll sit there, I'll be like, okay, let's crack back open the textbook and see why, right? But
isn't that funny?
You're right. You're just kind of energizing that pattern, aren't you? You're not just
that's the problem.
But you're making it worse in some ways, even if you think you're reasoning it out. Because I'm sure, as you'll attest, is you can reason something out and have every good reason to believe this isn't true. You shouldn't worry about it. But then you keep reasoning it anyways.
Exactly. That's because at that point, it's no longer a cognitive issue or a spiritual issue. It's actually now a brain issue. Mm-hmm. It started off as maybe a spiritual or some kind of a cognitive or emotional problem. And after a while, it is still that, but it's shifted to becoming a biological problem too, because remember, we are body, soul unities. And so now I've got a problem with my brain. It's working against me, and I got to refix that, dude, by not getting in the mud with that thought, because it's counterproductive. And so I say to people, look, like you pointed out, Pat, why not try something that might take to the end of the summer, or for a few people a little longer, some shorter. And so you don't get stuck in the same old patterns that end up not working and making things worse, like we've all experienced. I've experienced that, man, and that's frustrating, because you want desperately to get rid of this anxiety or depression, and the techniques you're using aren't working. They're counterproductive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's such a funny thing, and it's a trap that I still fall into all the time. So having this system in your book it really has gotten me excited, and I can't say I haven't gotten excited over a book or an approach to anxiety in a long time. So again, thank you not only for putting this together, but chatting about it. The one other thing I want to make sure we talk about that I think is again both very unique to your book and very important. You have a beautiful chapter, chapter 6, on suffering in general, healing, and frustration and disappointment on the spiritual side.
Yeah.
Because some people, I think, maybe they consider themselves spiritual, but not religious or what have you. So, maybe they'll think, okay, I'll look at the physical side, I'll do these mental exercises, but do I really need a deeper spiritual or religious life there? And if I already do, then how do I deal with suffering and healing and all that frustration in general? So I just want to kind of give you some space, maybe to offer some initial ways to think about this.
Well, thank you. I think one of the hardest things for those of us who love the Lord is that when we go through a period of suffering like that, of any sort, and God could clearly do something about it, and we pray, and it looks like it makes sense that God should step in, because number one, it would certainly bring healing to one of his children, me, and it would really increase my faith. But two, boy, a lot of people are going to find out about what you did, and it's going to build their faith and lift them up and encourage them, like Paul says in 2 Corinthians 1. Mm-hmm. You get more people to pray for something, and when it's answered, you got more people who are encouraged. So, Lord, it looks like this is a great chance for you to step in, and he's a no-show. I mean, he doesn't do anything, at least as far as you can tell. And so, I mean, where are you? I mean, I know you're real. I got no question about that. But you just kind of seem to be asleep. And so, number one, I do believe in healing, and I do believe that some people are more skilled and gifted at this than others. So, if you know people in your church that are especially good at laying on of hands and praying healing prayer, go to them and ask for repeated prayer, and do it 5 or 6 times or 7 or as many as you need. So, I do believe in that. But if nothing happens, then I think another problem occurs, and that is that people get frustrated and angry at God, but they don't know what to do with that. Now, the listener knows that the book of Psalms was actually the hymn book and worship for Israel. That's what they used to sing worship and hymns in the congregation of the synagogue to God. What people might not realize is about 48 of the 150 Psalms, or something like 30% to 33%, are actually complaints against God. They're called lament Psalms. Mm-hmm. And it's where the psalmist says, where are you? You seem to not be showing up. You don't seem to honor your covenant with us. Don't you notice what's been happening to us and our enemies that don't even love you are trampling on us and killing our children? So God, cut 2 of the Psalms of that sort end up with absolutely no resolution at all. It's not like at the end they say, "But yet I will praise you." They just end up with the psalmist holding his suffering, and there's no answer to it. Mm-hmm. And so these are complaints. They're actual complaints against God. And so what I tell people is, look, it is perfectly legitimate if you're angry at God because God hasn't helped you with your anxiety and depression in a way that you will hunger for and want. Tell him what you're thinking. Yell if you have to. Yell at God. Tell him you don't think he's very good at this point, or you don't think he loves you, or he's not there, or whatever you need to say. And because he knows it anyway, and he's not going to be intimidated by it. He loves you, period. There's no condemnation any longer, so you're not going to be condemned for this. Plus, there's biblical precedent for it. The lament psalms do the very same thing. If the reader doesn't believe me, Google lament psalms and read a few of them.
Mm-hmm.
But you better hold on to your hat and be sitting down before you do. And if you don't believe that, look at some of the prophets and what they say to God. I mean, look at Jeremiah in Lamentations chapter 2 and chapter 3. You're not going to believe what he says. But the point is, tell God, get it off your chest. Now, are you insane? Of course. We're all crazy if we say that God's not good.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's not true. I don't mean we're really insane, but I mean, of course that's not true. But you don't act at the point when you're suffering, Pat, you don't actually believe God is good or that God hears and answers prayer, that he cares. You really believe that he's utterly indifferent. That's what you really believe, though you wouldn't verbalize that.
Mm-hmm.
So what you ought to do is just say what you're thinking and feeling and be honest about it, because this becomes a healing exercise that will get you back to the point to where you do, in fact, trust God again and realize that you were wrong, and you actually come to believe the things about God that are true. And so I explain how to do that, the different ways that we can complain. And I want to help my brothers and sisters realize that disappointment with God is something that in anxiety and depression, a lot of times we have to face that too.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to find healthy ways to deal with it.
Wow. I mean, this is such an important book. And, again, something I can relate to. We're praying. Maybe we don't think that God's hearing us or he's indifferent. But I think in a very special way, your book and this conversation is an answer to my prayers about this. We recently went through a move. My anxiety has been quite a bit elevated because of that. So I've been praying on this. And then what comes on my screen, but Finding Quiet by Dr. Moreland. So
I'll be there. That's amazing.
So I think just maybe keeping a wider perspective too, and maybe thinking, okay, maybe God has been answering my prayers, just maybe not always in the way that I'm expecting either. I certainly believe that's the case with our conversation here.
Of course.
And thank you enough. Now, where is the best place? Because I want to make sure everybody gets a copy of this book. I can't recommend it enough. I'll link it in the show notes, but is there a special page you would want people to go to? Where can they grab it?
I think just going on Amazon.com. And the reviews have been just so moving and touching. There's one review where a guy's really mad at me because I recommend medications. And I just differ with him. But go on Amazon. I think that's the best place to get it. And I hope and prayer is that this book will continue to be uplifting and hope-inducing and helpful to people, because it sure has been to me.
Yeah, and I can't give it a strong enough endorsement. It has got me excited to begin practicing a number of these methods. So, again, a million things I could talk to you about, but I think this has been a really enriching conversation. Thanks again for taking the time, Dr. Moreland.
Well, you're welcome, and let's do it again sometime, Pat. Maybe we could talk down the road about something else. I'd love to be back on your show.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.